There's only about 7 animals on the entire Earth that actively see human beings as prey. The most infamous ones being polar bears, lions and tigers, Komodo dragons, and the crocodile. But 110 million years ago, humans didn't exist. Dinosaurs did. And so, crocodiles weren't sized up to eat humans, they sized up to eat dinosaurs. And this gave birth to what scientists called Sarcosuchus, aka the SuperCroc. And for once, this nickname isn't an exaggeration. It was 40 feet long and weighed at about 10 tons, which is basically 10 Nile crocodiles combined. But Sarcosuchus was not just a big crocodile. Sarcosuchus's growth pattern was broken. They never hit a size cap like modern crocodiles, and their bones show continuous growth for its entire life. It never stopped growing. But why did it get this big? Why did evolution take a perfectly good predator design and turn it into a fat 10-ton armored bus? And why aren't there any SuperCrocs left today? To understand why Sarcosuchus got so big, we first have to look at the default version of the animal, which is still pretty large. Modern crocodiles are effectively the perfection of the design. They've been around for millions of years because their current build just works. The large Nile or saltwater crocodile usually tops out around 20 feet and 2,000 pounds. And while that's definitely big enough to eat you, it's a very intentional limit. See, modern crocodilians follow a pretty strict biological schedule. They grow incredibly fast when they're young, but the moment they hit maturity, their body essentially says, okay, we're done. Most of that energy stops going towards getting longer and starts going towards reproduction. This is what scientists call determined growth. It's a responsible, balanced way to live. But there's a reason crocodiles don't keep growing until they're the size of a whale. They run into the most unstoppable force in biology: physics. On land, gravity is a crocodile's worst enemy. Even at 15 feet, a crocodile is already pushing the limits of its bone structure. If a modern crocodile tried to reach 40 feet, its own weight would likely crush its internal organs the moment it tried to crawl onto a muddy bank. So, if this is true, then how was it remotely possible that Sarcosuchus was 10 times the weight of one of these? Well, the answer is actually pretty simple. Sarcosuchus just stopped caring about land. See, while gravity is a nightmare on dirt, in the water, you're practically weightless. It's the same reason blue whales can be 100 feet long without their skeletons crumbling. While they were technically amphibious, they were much more waterbound than crocodiles today. So what did they do on land? Well, the short answer is as little as possible. Its legs were thick, but they weren't miracle workers. Moving 20,000 pounds across a muddy riverbank is essentially a physics disaster. On land, Sarcosuchus wasn't an apex predator, more like a giant belly slide. Every foot it moved on dirt was an agonizing, energy-draining crawl that probably burnt through its fuel faster than the animal could find it. They likely laid eggs or crossed to other rivers, but most of their time had to be spent in water since their bodies simply weren't built for being on land for long periods. Existing on land for extended time would cause massive fatigue, organ stress, or just straight organ crushing. Okay, so they were big, and so big they could only kind of move on land. But why get so big? Well, take a look at everything else living around it. The Cretaceous wasn't a peaceful river system by any means. In a modern river, a 15-foot Nile crocodile has zero competition. It's the end of the predator line. But in the Cretaceous, a 15-foot reptile was basically a snack for a Spinosaurus. In this environment, being normal-sized was a death sentence. Evolution essentially gave Sarcosuchus two options: stay small and stay hidden, or double down on mass until nothing could feasibly kill you. Sarcosuchus chose the second option. By reaching 10 tons, Sarcosuchus wasn't just a predator anymore, but more a big, obnoxious obstacle. Most dinosaurs, even the big ones, aren't looking for a fight that might result in a broken leg or a crushed skull. When you're the size of a bus and covered in bone plating, most things, including the Spinosaurus, are probably going to decide to look for an easier meal elsewhere. So the real question is, who would win in a fight between the two? Well, because they lived in the same river systems at the exact same time, they were essentially roommates. And since they both ate the same car-sized fish, they were definitely aware of each other. Well, in a movie, they'd fight to the death in a spectacular, blood-filled brawl. But in reality, the winner of a Spinosaurus versus Sarcosuchus fight is usually whoever decides to walk away first. Predators aren't stupid. In the wild, there are no hospitals. A single deep scratch or a cracked rib can lead to an infection or a loss of mobility that eventually leads to starvation. For these two, a full-blown fight wouldn't be some sick battle where one slurps the other up and continues on some epic march. The loser dies, and the winner will probably die a week later from its injuries. But if they were forced to throw down, Spinosaurus has the reach. It's taller, it's longer, and it has massive hooked claws that could likely tear through the thinner parts of Sarcosuchus' neck or underbelly. If the fight stays in shallow water where Spinosaurus can stand, it has the mobility advantage. But the moment the water gets deep, the advantage shifts to the SuperCroc. Sarcosuchus used the anchor strategy. It doesn't matter how big a Spinosaurus is, if 10 tons of muscle latches onto your leg and pulls you into the deep, you are fighting physics. Sarcosuchus doesn't even need to win the fight, it just needs to hold on. Once it pulls its prey into deeper water, the Spinosaurus loses its footing, and it's over. Most likely though, they lived in a state of mutual respect. Or more accurately, mutual please don't bite me. It was a Cretaceous stalemate. The Spinosaurus was too big for the Sarcosuchus to easily kill, and the Sarcosuchus was too well armed for the Spinosaurus to bother attacking. They probably just glared at each other from across the river while they both went back to eating fish. But why get so big just to avoid each other and eat fish? Well, these fish were also gigantic. In the Cretaceous, the rivers weren't filled with minnows and catfish. They were filled with monsters. One of the most common sights in Sarcosuchus' territory was a fish named Morsonia. It was a prehistoric coelacanth that grew up to 13 feet long, essentially a fish the size of a Toyota Corolla. And these weren't soft, easy-to-kill targets. They were covered in thick, bony scales that acted like natural chainmail. To catch a car-sized fish that's armored like a tank, you need a very specific set of tools. And that is where SuperCroc's design gets really weird. If you look at the snout of a modern Nile crocodile, it's wide and heavy, built for the death roll and crushing bone. But Sarcosuchus had a snout that was long, surprisingly thin, and ended in a strange, hollow bulb called a bulba. It's a design that seems like a complete mismatch. Usually, long, thin snouts are for fish-only specialists like the modern gharial, which is a 15-foot lightweight that eats tiny, fast-moving prey. But Sarcosuchus was 10 tons. It's essentially the body of a tank with the face of a pair of needle-nose pliers. So why the thin snout? And what was the point of that weird bulb at the end? Well, the thin snout was likely a trade-off. While it wasn't as good as crushing as a modern croc's head, it was much faster in the water. It allowed Sarcosuchus to whip its head sideways with minimal resistance, snapping up those massive fish before they could dart away. But the bulb, the bulla, is the real biological mystery. For a long time, scientists thought it might be for smelling or even some kind of specialized breathing. But the more they look at it, the more it looks like Sarcosuchus had evolved a biological megaphone. Modern crocodiles are actually very vocal. They hiss, bark, and use low-frequency thumps to communicate through the water. By having a massive, hollow resistance chamber at the tip of its nose, Sarcosuchus could likely produce sounds that were terrifyingly loud. But even more terrifying than its voice was the fact that Sarcosuchus seemingly had no upper limit. To understand how we know this, scientists had to do something called bone histology, which is a fancy way of saying they cut into the fossilized bones to see what's happening inside. Bones are a lot like tree trunks. Every year an animal is alive, it leaves behind a growth ring. In modern crocodiles, these rings show a very clear story. They grow like crazy for about 10 years, and then the rings get incredibly close together. This is called an asymptote, the point where the animal hits maturity and its body decides that being 15 feet long is plenty. After that, they mostly get thicker, not longer. But when scientists looked at Sarcosuchus, the rings didn't follow the script. Sarcosuchus showed continuous, wide growth rings for almost its entire life. It didn't hit a cap at year 10, or year 20, or even year 30. Its bones suggest that it spent nearly half a century in a permanent state of getting bigger. It really did never stop growing. In terms of an evolutionary strategy, this is incredibly overpowered, but also incredibly risky. Most animals stop growing because maintenance is expensive. Every extra foot of length requires more blood, more oxygen, and, most importantly, more food. By refusing to stop growing, Sarcosuchus was effectively locking itself into a lifestyle where it had to be the most dominant thing in the river, because a 10-ton body cannot afford a bad week of hunting. This constant growth is likely why it needed that specialized, thin snout for catching fish and that massive anchor weight for dragging dinosaurs. It wasn't just being a big crocodile for the sake of it. It was trying to keep up with the metabolic demands of its out-of-control biology. So how did they die? Well, that same out-of-control biology is basically what killed them. Around 95 million years ago, the map started to change. The lush, wet environment of the Cretaceous began to shift. Global sea levels fluctuated, and the massive river systems that the Sarcosuchus called home started to fragment and dry up. For a 15-foot modern crocodile, this is an inconvenience. They can just walk to the next pond. But for a 40-foot, 10-ton armored bus that can barely move on land, a drying river is a death sentence. They were effectively trapped by their own mass. As the rivers shrank, so did the food. The car-sized fish like Morsonia began to disappear, and the giant dinosaurs had to move elsewhere to find water. This is where the logistics nightmare of the SuperCroc build finally caught up with them. We've seen this before with things like the Megalodon or the Leviathan, and if you watched our video about them, it wasn't that they all died instantly from some disease or some other predator. They died because their food died. As well, when rivers shrank, even if there was still somehow giant fish on them, a small river can't really fit a 50-foot croc that easily. When the massive Cretaceous waterways began to fragment and dry up, the SuperCroc became a prisoner of its own size, basically a beached whale, just slightly more capable on land. Sarcosuchus was a monster built for a world of giants, but when the giants left, the giant was ripped out of them too, and all that was left was a moderately sized crocodile. Still deadly, still one of the only animals in the world that would eat you, but not a total monster. The last thing I want to mention before the video ends though is Sarcosuchus wasn't actually a true crocodile. It was a Phyllidosaurid. The only thing is, the crocs actually have such a similar body plan besides it being scaled up that basically everyone calls them crocodiles. I mean, look at them. How did you not think these were going to be in a Kong movie? But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed watching. This channel is still extremely new, so please show some support and help us reach some subscribers. If you guys have seen my other channel, then I think you'll like the videos here too. Also, check out this video if you want to see about the world's deadliest predator. It's technically deadlier than any crocodile.